Today's video brings us to the scenic city of Stillwater, Minnesota. Stillwater is situated on the banks of the St. Croix River. The city was once part of St. Croix County, Wisconsin. It was primarily used as a lumber camp and sawmill. Minnesota became a separate territory in 1849, and the St. Croix River became the border between the territory of Wisconsin and Minnesota. Hence, Stillwater became part of Minnesota. Soon, Stillwater would be known as the Prison City, and that is where our story begins. Were proposed by Governor Alexander Ramsey in 1849. Federal funds were secured the following year. Millwright Jacob Fisher was the architect, and the contractor was the Jesse Taylor Company. Construction began in 1851. The area selected for the territorial prison, because Minnesota was not yet a state, was a site once known as Battle Hollow. The area had once been the location of a Native American skirmish between the Ojibwe and Dakota tribes. 21 Ojibwe lost their lives during the battle. It was on the northern edge of Stillwater and close to the St. Croix River, making it a convenient location for a prison. The original prison was just a few cells, but it did eventually grow into a 13-story, 16-cell cell house that measured 30 by 40 feet. It also had 2 shops, a stable, and a few other small buildings. The yard was enclosed by a 14-foot stone wall with a heavy iron gate. They also built a house for the warden that overlooked the prison. Locally quarried limestone and lumber were used in its construction. Sources vary on the timeline, but upon completion of the prison, prisoners who had previously been confined at Fort Snelling were transferred to the newly constructed cell house, timing being between 1851 and 1854. The most common crimes of the day were rioting, adultery, and stealing of horses. The first warden assigned to the facility was Francis R. Delano. Delano started a prison library, hired a chaplain and a physician to the complex. He oversaw 8 convicts in 1855, 1 convict in 1856, and 0 convicts in 1857. It appears his duties were minimal. He was also not very well liked. A news article from the day reads, as of the end of 1857, they had 6 prisoners housed. Since April of 1855, there have been 11 escapes and 5 prisoners have been discharged and set free by the officers because the county commissioners from the counties they came from had not paid for their board in advance. Some of these prisoners had committed murder. Abel Wilcox, who was committed on a charge of murder, escaped by means unknown to the warden, and no reward was offered and no steps have been taken to apprehend him. One prisoner, Richard Toner of Winona, Minnesota, had committed murder in Blue Earth, Minnesota. He attempted to escape in 1857. A mob of men found him and hung him. It was also found that Maria Roblin committed a charge of selling spirituous liquors to Indians within the U.S. territory. She escaped, and in the words of the record, she escaped by leaving the prison. It seems that residents of Stillwater were not impressed by the way the wardens ran the prison. In 1858, Minnesota became a state, and a new warden was assigned to the prison. His name was Francis O.J. Smith. He filled the office for only 5 months. Why, you may ask? Well, it appears that Francis liked the local prostitutes and would invite him to the prison to, service them. So he was let go from his office. He was succeeded by Henry N. Setzer. Henry stayed just under 2 years, and then he refused to work because he did not agree with the President of the United States. Who was it? Abraham Lincoln. See, Henry was into slavery. He was a Democrat, and he did not appreciate the fact that a Republican was now in charge of the country, so he refused to keep his position. Henry was replaced by John S. Proctor. John remained warden over 8 years, and then Joshua L. Taylor was appointed and stayed a little over 2 years. Next was A.C. Weber, and in 7 months, he was superseded by Henry A. Jackman. On August 3rd, 1874, John A. Reed became Henry's successor. J. A. Reed had been accused of prison abuse during his time in Stillwater. On June 23rd, 1888, John tried to unalive himself with a bullet to the head, but was unsuccessful. Wings to the prison wall were built on, and other shops were added in 1870. During this time, outside companies were permitted to build shops and manufacturing buildings within the prison limits and use convicts as workers. From 1860 to 1870, there was a yearly average of 20 convicts, with the least being 7 in 1862 and 1864, and the most being 47 in 1869. In 1861, 3 cells were added for women prisoners. Many fires occurred on the prison grounds, the most severe being on January 8, 1884. The large workshop and machinery owned by the Northwestern Car Company were destroyed. A second fire occurred just 18 days later in the cell house. 1 prisoner perished by suffocation. Warden Reed had held the office for nearly 13 years when he was succeeded by H. G. Stordock. By 1889, the cell capacity had grown from 22 to 582. In 1889, a hospital was constructed on the prison grounds. In 1889, J. J. Randall took over as warden. Randall was followed by Alfred Garvin. In 1890, the prison stopped allowing the further leasing of labor of the prisoners. They instead utilized the prisoners in their own state-run factories, along with piece price system that was worked out with the Union Shoe and Leather Company. The prisoners either worked in the shoe factory, the twine binding factory, or another department within the prison, such as janitorial, laundry, etc. This change made the prison completely self-sustaining and taught prisoners valuable skills that could be used after incarceration. In June of 1892, Henry Wolfer was appointed Garvin's successor. He would hold the office until December of 1899, when General C. McReeve took over. Reeve remained warden until March of 1901, and then Mr. Wolfer was reappointed as warden. The population of the prison on January 1st, 1901 was 688 males and 10 females. The prison was said to be damp and infested with roaches and bedbugs. In the early days, escapes were said to be frequent and punishments harsh. Staff punished prisoners for unruly conduct or disobedience by putting prisoners in the dungeon, handcuffing them to the bars of the cell door for 10 or more hours a day, and then allowing them to be uncuffed so that they could sleep. There wasn't a bed, just a board on the hard floor. They were fed bread and water. Staff was also permitted to whip prisoners 20 times a day for 5 days as a punishment. So this is the warden's house. Today we are going to take a tour. Right next to the warden's house is where the prison used to stand. All that remains is one part of a guard tower. As time went on, the punishment of whipping was stopped, but solitary confinement remained. Warden Wolfer informed the state on the conditions of the prison, stating that it was overcrowded, damp, poorly ventilated, and infested with cockroaches and bed bugs. The warden's concerns were heard, and plans for a new prison began. In order to get a better idea of what it was like to be imprisoned here, I did find an article that was written in 1909. I will put a link to the full article down below so you can check it out if you want to read it all. But I'm just going to read a portion of it so that you can get an idea of what it was like to be a prisoner in Stillwater Prison. An incoming prisoner is designated by the inmate as a fresh fish. He enters the administration building, and as a rule, if he has the reputation of being a slippery chap, is handcuffed to the sheriff or one of his deputies. Handcuffs in the vernacular of underground world are called come-alongs. He now enters a room known as between the gates. One of these gates leads to the outer world and the other to the inside of the prison. Here the prisoner's commitment papers are examined, the deputy warden sent to receive the new arrival, and slips are immediately made out notifying the several heads of departments of the man's name, county from which he came, the offense to which he has committed, and the time that he shall serve. Upon the arrival of the deputy warden, the prisoner is taken in charge and marched through the officer's barber shop and kitchen. Upon leaving the latter room, the fresh fish is commanded to turn to the right, and a short distance ahead, about 20 feet, he is told to turn to the left. He now enters the large cell house, his future home, to remain for the number of years that His Honor, the judge of the district court, has sentenced him to serve. The cell house contains 664 cells and is in charge of an officer known as the captain of the cell house. This officer now takes the new arrival in charge and searches his person thoroughly, empties his pockets of everything they contain, and takes his coat, hat, and vest. Any valuables found on him, such as money, jewelry, trinkets, tobacco, etc., are immediately tied up in a bundle and sent to the deputy warden's office. A duplicate receipt is made out for all articles of intrinsic value. It is signed by the captain of the cell house and also by the new arrival so as to ensure their safekeeping until the day of his release. The next move is to the bathroom, where he takes a bath and puts on a second grade uniform, there being 3 grades in all. The first is the highest. Its garb consists of neat gray suit and cap. First grade prisoners are entitled to write 1 letter each week, to draw a ration, 4 ounces, of tobacco weekly, and to receive visitors once in 4 weeks. They have a dining room to themselves and are served with a greater variety of food than are the prisoners in other grades. They also have such privileges granted them from time to time as their general conduct warrants. Prisoners in the second grade are clothed in black and gray check, suit, and cap. They are permitted to write 1 letter a fortnight, to draw a ration of tobacco weekly, and to see visitors once a month. They also have a dining room of their own, but the food served thereon is not as varied as that served to first grade men. The latter, for example, are served with butter and other relishes at stated intervals, but such things are not part of the diet of the second grade prisoners. Inmates in the third grade wear black and white striped suits. They are denied tobacco, writing, and visiting privileges, and their meals are served in their cells, which are located in one portion of the cell house. In none of the grades are prisoners required to march with the lockstep, and excepting those in the third grade. All are permitted to wear their hair long enough to comb during their good behavior. The prisoner, after his bath, is again brought into the cell house, and the captain has one of the inmate barbers clip his hair and shave him. If the new arrival belongs to the respectable class, wearing a mustache and dressed well, he will hardly recognize himself as he should chance to look into the mirror. After the tonsorial artist has completed his task, the prisoner is conducted to the deputy warden's office, where he is weighed, asked innumerable questions, etc., instructed as the rules of the institution, measured according to the Beryllian system, which is the standard adopted in this country and throughout Europe. Our new arrival is still in the hands of the record office. His next introduction is to what is known as the fingerprint system. All prisoners are at first compelled to have photos taken of the balls of their fingers, the procedure being very simple. The recording officer has an inking stone and brayer similar to those used in print shops for pulling proofs. He inks the stone, grasps the outstretched finger of the new arrival, the underside or ball of his finger rolled a full turn on the stone, and then given a similar roll on paper blanks provided for that purpose, which are filed away in a cabinet with the Beryllian records for future reference. These blanks are frequently consulted for the purpose of identifying escaped or suspected offenders. After the operation of taking the new arrival's finger imprints is completed and instructions are given as to prison discipline, etc., the incoming prisoner is sent to the medical department, where he is given a thorough physical exam. And if he is affected with any disease, it is noted in a book kept expressly for that purpose. If he needs medical attention, he is told to come up to the sick call in the forenoon at 9 o'clock. All ailing prisoners can attend this call each morning. By this time, the new arrival is, in all probability, wondering what will happen next, but he is soon enlightened. Work in one of the various departments will be assigned to him. For instance, presuming that the shop where he is to be employed is the twine factory, he is turned over to the guard of that particular shop. This officer instructs him very minutely as to shop rules and duties that will dissolve him, and usually accompanies his instructions with some good sound advice as to how to best get along with the least possible trouble. The shop foreman now takes him in charge and instructs him to perform the duties required of him. At the noon hour, he must take off his apron, wash his hands, and face in a bucket of water placed conveniently near the shop runner. And when the guard blows another sharp blast with his whistle, form in a line with the other men and prepare to march on to the dining room. He is now assigned a place in the ranks of his shop crew and told he must always fall in at his place. The guard stamps his cane twice on the floor, and the men begin to march to dinner. At first, the fresh fish makes quite a number of mistakes. In the dining room, he is somewhat bewildered as to how to make his wants known to the waiters, as he has been told that talking is strictly forbidden. But upon reading the rules of the library catalog, he easily comprehends the silent method of asking for food. If he wishes bread, he must hold up his right hand. Meat, his fork. Soup, his spoon. Vegetables, his table knife. Coffee, his cup. And for water, the rule is to hold up the cup inverted. This form of sign language is fully adequate for the situation. At the close of the first day's work, the prisoner is marched to his cell. Just inside the entrance to the cell house, he is handed his supper in a tin dish, goes to his cell, previously assigned to him, and remains standing with his right hand on the cell door until the evening count of the number of prisoners in the institution has been verified by the deputy warden. If the count is correct, the prisoners are notified by the sounding of a gong, at which signal they are permitted to sit down and amuse themselves as they see fit. Immediately after the ringing of the gong, the gallery men pass around tea for the prisoner's evening meal in addition to what he received when he entered the cell house. Our subject now has an opportunity to take a glance at the cell. This apartment is not commodious nor supplied with modern improvements of a first-class hostelry. Its dimensions are 5 by 7 and contains 1 Bible, 2 cups, 1 small mirror, 1 cuspidor, 1 spoon, 1 face towel, 1 dish towel, 1 piece of soap, 1 comb, blankets, sheets, pillowcases, mattress, bedstead and springs, 1 wooden chair for first and second grade, 1 earthen water jug with cover, 1 electric light, 1 small shelf, 1 library catalog, and all the library and school books desired. The deputy warden's office is located on the ground floor of the hospital building. On this floor are also located the punishment cells, the crank department, and the insane ward. At the present time, there are about 20 insane prisoners there, and many are very dangerous and quite difficult to handle. Mike Brennan has been locked in this ward for many years. He is a life prisoner, has violent homicidal tendencies, and has attacked several prisoners before being finally separated from his fellow inmates. Mike Cunningham, who recently killed another prisoner and received a life sentence, is confined in the crank department. Cunningham is very treacherous. He conceals a sharp instrument about his person to use whenever an opportunity presents itself. He is guarded with great care by the officer in charge to see that he obtains nothing of a dangerous nature. Corporal punishment is strictly prohibited, and no guard or officer is permitted to club a prisoner except in self-defense or to quell a mutiny. The following are the principal offenses to which prisoners are reported: altering clothing, bed not properly made, clothing not in proper order, communication by signs, defacing property, dilatory, dirty cell or furnishings, disobedience, disturbance in cell house, fighting, hands in pockets, hands or face not clean, hair not combed, impertinence to visitors, insolence to officers, insolence to foremen, insolence to fellow prisoners, inattentive in line, inattentive at work, inattentive in school, laughing and fooling, loud talk in cell, loud reading in cell, malicious mischief, not out of bed promptly, not at door for count, not wearing outside shirt, not promptly out of cell when break is done, out of place in shop or line, profanity, quarreling, shirking, spitting on the floor, staring at visitors, stealing, trading, talking in chapel, talking in line, talking in school, talking at work, talking from cell to cell, talking in corridor, and throwing away food. The hospital is located on the western end of the yard and at the head of the main thoroughfare of the prison. Dr. B. J. Merrill has been at the head of the department for many years and is considered one of the best physicians and surgeons in the state. He is assisted by a resident physician constantly in attendance. The head physician visits the prison each morning at 9 o'clock and prescribes for those present at sick call. This call, as previously stated, takes place every morning, the men being gathered from the various departments of the prison by the assistant deputy warden. Any prisoner who is not feeling well need only inform the guard that he wishes to see the doctor, and his request is granted. This is obligatory on the part of the guard, as the physician's orders are final in such matters. When the sick call men arrive at the hospital, they form in line just outside the door and are called into the doctor's office one at a time. The inmate states his complaint and his name, and prescription is entered on the records. If too sick to work, he is permitted to either stay in the hospital, loaf in the park, or remain in a cell for the day. There are several cells in the cell house which are used exclusively for this purpose. After the chronic cases have been disposed of, the chief physician attends to the more serious ailments. He also prescribes the diet for the sick prisoners, and if they order anything that is not in the culinary department, is purchased at once. The hospital is well patronized by the inmates. During the month of July 1908, 2,018 cases were diagnosed, but the building used for the hospital is now altogether inadequate to accommodate the growing demands of the institution, as the population of the prison has practically doubled during the past decade. With regard to epidemics, the prison has been very fortunate, and the mortality list has been exceedingly small. The death rate for 1908 was only 9, principally due to tuberculosis, a disease which is quite prevalent in penitentiaries the world over. During the summer months, the convalescent patients are permitted the freedom of the park all day. Those who are unable to walk are carried down and given an opportunity to get the beneficial outdoor air. A prison is not an admirable place for those disinclined to work. A man occasionally succeeds in hoodwinking the authorities for a time, but this rarely occurs. Whenever there is a reasonable doubt, the prisoner is given the benefit of it. A case in particular is that of one Mr. B, who complained that the entire lower part of his body was paralyzed and that he was unable to walk. He was given a pair of crutches and put in the hospital ward, where he lived well, his wants supplied by the attendants, and where he had absolutely nothing to do. The doctor suspected that he was faking and secretly applied tests to verify their belief. Evidently, the man was on his guard and fully acquainted with the various modes of procedure in such cases. Finally, Warden Wolfer took his case under personal charge and evolved a plan that the clever prisoner had not figured on as one of the possibilities of detection. The strategy was this. A newly appointed guard was dressed in a third-grade suit of convict clothes on the day when the prisoners in the crank department were given their weekly shave. Mr. B was sitting on the bench waiting to be shaved. The deputy warden stepped into the room with the alleged third-grade prisoner and gruffly ordered him to be seated, then turned to the barber and told him to shave the third-grade man next, as he was in a hurry. Not an inkling of suspicion flashed across Mr. B's brain. In the door leading into this ward, a small peephole is arranged, enabling the guard to look into the room without entering. The warden was stationed behind this door to observe the results of this scheme. As the third-grade prisoner sat down to be shaved, he suddenly seized one of the barber's razors, and with a whoop, jumped out of the chair and made for the helpless Mr. B, who immediately cast aside his crutches and rushed down the corridor to escape from the supposed demented prisoner. The fact that his legs were paralyzed and that he was acting a part was entirely forgotten. At this stage of the proceedings, the warden entered the room and informed the crestfallen Mr. B that the comedy was over. At first, he was inclined to continue the paralytic role, but when informed that he had the option of going to work or taking an indefinite stay on bread and water diet, he wisely chose the first alternative, and for the remainder of his term gave no more trouble. A man by the name of Andrew Andrews actually broke into prison for the purpose of stealing. He had procured a rope ladder and scaled one of the rear walls, made his way to the Western Shoe Company's factory, and selected the finest case of shoes he could find. He then retraced his way to the wall, tied a rope to the case of shoes, climbed up, and went away as though the act of stealing shoes from a penitentiary was an everyday accomplishment for him. He was also captured, and it was then discovered that he had been a former inmate, accounting for his familiarity with the grounds. The place is constantly patrolled by two night watchmen, and it is still a mystery how he managed to evade them. This act might have been performed out of a spirit of reckless bravado to demonstrate to the other inmates that he was fully capable. His little stunt, however, cost him another residence of 3.5 years at the prison. Like the majority of the better class prisons, Minnesota's penitentiary has the honor of having, within its walls, a well equipped band and orchestra. They are in charge of an experienced citizen music teacher and have made remarkable progress since organization. About 19 members compose the band, mostly men who have a long time to serve. The orchestra provides music for the services in the prison chapel, and when entertainments are given, provides their musical numbers on the program. Of late years, it has attained a degree of efficiency that has been commended very highly by prominent visitors to the institution. The band gives a concert each morning during the summer months and also during drill exercises, which take place in the yard every Sunday immediately after chapel service. Concerts are also given in the park on holidays when the men are enjoying outdoor freedom, which the inmates appreciate very much, helping wonderfully to break the dull routine monotony of prison life. The band and orchestra cost the state very little. Its instruments are paid for out of the fees received from visitors who pay a 25-cent admission to see the institution. This amount is donated to the benefit of the library fund. The shoe factory is conducted by the Western Shoe Company and annually employs about 225 prisoners. This is an excellent opportunity here for the inmate to learn a trade at which he can make a good living upon his release. Few citizens are employed at this work, but a competent citizen foreman is in charge of each shop. As far as possible, prisoners are taught the business of making shoes, and many of them become very proficient at this work. The company pays a stated price for each piece of work turned out, and the per diem earnings of the prisoners is larger than in any other prison in the country. The volume of business of these two industries amounts annually to more than $2 million. Of this total, returns from the twine factory operated on state account amounts to $1.3 million, while the shoe company operated on the piece price system does a business in excess of $800,000. All the repair work of the institution is performed in the repair shop, and in this shop there is located the tinner, plumbers, carpenters, painters, machinists, etc., all under the supervision of a first-class foreman. The tinner makes all the tinware used in the various departments of the prison and attends to its repairing. As the entire institution is heated by steam, the plumbers are kept constantly employed during the winter repairing radiators and overhauling worn-out steam pipes. As repairs and improvements are constantly being made, and as the prison buildings are quite old, considerable carpenter work is also necessitated each year. Perhaps the busiest men in the shop are the machinists, whose business is to see that all machinery, shafting, etc. are kept in repair, thus reducing breakdowns in the minimum. This shop is run in an economical manner and annually saves the state thousands of dollars. The tailor shop, laundry, and bathroom are all located in the same building, about 20 prisoners being constantly employed in the former, making and repairing clothing for the inmates. The second and third rooms, of course, are devoted to washing and drying of clothes and bathing of prisoners, as there are about 700 prisoners whose clothing must be mended and washed each week. The employees of this shop find all the work they wish to do. The bathroom is located below the tailor shop in a 2-story building. Here, bathing operations are begun each Friday morning under the supervision of a guard who marches the prisoners to the bathroom, 28 at a time, and each is provided with an overhead shower bath of hot or cold water. As the guard marches in with the men, the prisoners remain standing in front of their shower until the attendant registers their numbers, and the guard then stamps his cane twice on the floor to notify the prisoners to begin bathing. The registered number slips are sent upstairs, where the inmate's clothing is kept in pigeonholes arranged along the walls of the laundry, each pigeonhole being labeled with the prisoner's register number. And at the expiration of his bath, is hastily sent downstairs and placed on the small door leading to his stall. Each prisoner is given a clean handkerchief and a pair of socks. When the men are through bathing and the guard again stamps twice on the floor with his cane, they step out of the bathing booths, and at the signal of the march, back to the shop begins. It requires about 15 minutes to bathe 28 men. Just in the rear of the tailor shop is a cobbler, whose duties are to repair the shoes of the inmates. All the shoes are brought, including the discharged clothing worn by the inmates when they are released from prison. Two of the inmates' dining rooms are located just above the officer's kitchen and beneath the prison chapel. The population of the prison, however, has increased so rapidly during the past few years that it was found necessary to make room for the overflow in the chapel and mess room opposite the officer's kitchen. One of the rooms in the main dining hall is devoted to first-grade prisoners, and the other to the second grade. Entering the dining room, the prisoner promptly takes his seat and remains with his arms folded until the signal to eat is given by the deputy warden. There are 6 waiters in each dining room, and it is their business to see that the men are promptly served. Some pass nothing but bread, others coffee or water, and the rest attend to distributing the miscellaneous items on the bill of fare. Talking is forbidden in the dining room at all times. The food is very plain but wholesome, and there is always plenty of it. The following bills of fare will give an idea of the food served. They were selected from house stewards' records and are authentic copies from that date. January 4th, 1907 was a Sunday. For breakfast, they had baked pork and beans, light biscuits, syrup, butter, and coffee. For dinner, it was roast beef, mashed potatoes, mashed turnips, gravy, bread, pickles, and cake. And for supper, it was hot tea. Monday's breakfast was fried pork sausage, potatoes, gravy, bread, and coffee. Dinner was vegetable soup, boiled fresh beef, bread, potatoes, pickled beets. And for supper, it was stewed beans, white and graham bread, and tea. On Tuesday for breakfast was corned beef hash, syrup, bread, and coffee. For dinner was boiled ham, cabbage, potatoes, gravy, bread, and bread pudding. For supper was applesauce, white and graham bread, and tea. On holidays, especially Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, an excellent meal is served to every inmate in the institution, and they are allowed on all legal holidays to spend 3 hours in the prison park, where they are given the privilege of talking. Every inmate in the institution is given a library catalog and permitted to draw out 2 books a week. He is his own free agent in the selection of books, receiving just what he has ordered on his library slips. These slips contain the number of the books selected by him and are gathered up by the night guards. If an inmate mutilates a book, he is denied the privilege of the library. The Mirror Office. The prison Mirror, with the exception of the summary published at the Elmira Reformatory, is the oldest institutional paper in the country. It is also the only paper exclusively managed by the prisoners. All other penal and reformatory periodicals being conducted by a high-salaried superintendent, or else the policy is under the supervision of the chaplain. The Mirror is issued each Thursday, has a circulation of about 1,500, and it is distributed free to the inmates of the institution, who are permitted to send the same to relatives or friends free of charge. The subscription price to the general public is $1, and it goes to nearly every state in the Union. This publication is edited and managed by a prisoner who has full charge of the printing department. Each Wednesday, chase proofs of the following day's issues are submitted to the warden for approval, but he is rarely called upon to exercise his censorship, as the editor is instructed to eliminate all personalities and sensational topics. The female ward. On an average, there are 10 females in the matron's ward. This department is located above the administration quarters and is entirely separated from the cell house. It is impossible for the occupants of the latter to communicate with the former. The women's ward is presided over by Miss McKinney, who has been in charge for many years. The rules governing women prisoners are not nearly as strict as those pertaining to the men. Their food also is of better quality. In the summer, they are permitted to take outdoor exercise each evening during good behavior. The women prisoners are subject to the grading system and also receive the benefit of the parole law. If they wish to do so, they can attend chapel services every Sunday morning. Their work is not very arduous, being mainly confined to keeping the officers' rooms in a neat and orderly condition. A large greenhouse is located in the western end of the prison yard, just opposite the prison hospital, presided over by a life prisoner who has been there over 18 years. By the boys of the institution, he is known as Sinbad the Sailor, having spent many years on the high seas, on board of whalers, and in the Old Navy. The greenhouse supplies flowers for decorating the lawns and park, cut flowers for the hospital inmates, the officers and guards, mess rooms, and the rooms used by the members of the State Board of Control on their monthly visits to the prison. When Sinbad becomes lonely for the wash of the sea waves, his assistant throws a few buckets of water against the side of the greenhouse, and he exercises his imagination for the rest. It is not generally known, but nevertheless, the prison maintains a well-organized fire department. This brigade is not a large one, but as a first aid in case of necessity, it is equipped to do so efficiently. All prisoners are required to bathe once a week in the summer, once in 2 weeks in the winter, and oftener if considered necessary by the prison physician, unless excused by him. The mode of punishment infractions of the prison rules at the Stillwater Penitentiary consists of standing the prisoner on the inside of a cell door, putting his hands through the bars, and handcuffed on the outside. He is kept standing in this position 10 hours during the day, and then let down during the night, is allowed only a single slice of bread and a cup of water each day, while undergoing punishment. There are no beds in these cells, nothing but a plank on which to sleep. As a rule, prisoners are only kept in these punishment cells from 4 to 6 days, and it frequently occurs that he is released in 1 day, providing he promises to obey the rules and will not get in trouble again. It is not the custom to subject the inmates of the Stillwater Penitentiary to this form of punishment for trivial offenses, but it is applied to those prisoners who attempt to escape, who destroy property, who indulge in fights, or display general negligence in regard to their work. On entering the punishment cell, the prisoner is searched thoroughly and given a third-grade uniform. After the punishment is over, he is kept in the third grade for 30 days, and by good conduct at the end of that time, he is admitted to the second grade. While in the third grade, all of his privileges are cut off, such as permission to write letters, receive visits from friends, tobacco, and newspapers. Not very many prisoners are subjected to this form of punishment, and it is resorted to only when other means of enforcing prison discipline fails. The Stillwater prison did house some infamous convicts, the most notable being the Younger brothers. Cole, Jim, and Bob Younger were admitted to the penitentiary in November of 1876. They had all been given life sentences for the Northfield, Minnesota bank robbery that they participated in with Jesse and Frank James, and 3 others. Joseph Lee Haywood and Nicholas Gustafson were killed along with a few gang members during the attempted crime. Cole, Jim, and Bob's prison numbers were 699, 700, and 701. According to prison logs, the Younger brothers were oftentimes reported as sick in the cell, most likely an excuse to get out of work. Bob Younger did end up dying here in 1889 of tuberculosis. Jim and Cole were paroled in 1901. Jim unalived himself the following year. Next door to the prison, up on the hill, was and still is the warden's house. The home was home to 13 different wardens over the years. The original structure was much smaller. Additions were added to the back of the home in the 1870s. It also sported a full-width balcony along the front of the home, which was replaced in 1910. The original carriage house behind the main house was torn down in about 1914. The house has 14 rooms that have been lovingly restored. The home now serves as the local historical society and a museum. It is the second oldest home in the state of Minnesota and a beautiful example of 1800s architecture. Now, when a prisoner did die in prison, the family could choose to claim the body for burial, as was the case with Bob Younger. He was transported back to his birthplace of Lee's Summit, Missouri. But those that were not claimed were buried in Fairview Cemetery, Block 3, in unmarked graves. People like Horatio Robinson, Stephen Burns, James Clinton, Patrick Harrity, Henry Lemke, Elwood Lewis, Samson McGon, James McConnell, Thomas Shippey, George Sandfield, John Swanson, Otto Swanson, Herman Carl Tradich, Henry Van Elsen, and John Randolph are all buried here. One woman prisoner by the name of Pauline Kreutzer threw herself from a 40-foot-high prison window, breaking her neck. She was 60 years old and most likely is also laid to rest here. The last and longest-serving warden of the prison, Henry Wolfer, is also buried here, along with his wife Alice and his children Charles, Donald, Harry, and Gertrude. Gertrude also went by the name Trudy. Trudy died September 21st, 1908, at the age of 25 of an apparent appendicitis. She had an 8-year-old son named Winston. Her parents, Henry and Alice, took Winston into their home at the warden's house. He was eventually returned to his father's care. The warden's house is said to be haunted by the ghost of Trudy. It is said that the spirit has stomach pains and is looking for her baby. There is also a young boy said to haunt the residence, and the sound of coal being shoveled can also be heard in the home. We are at Fairview Cemetery in Stillwater. This is where some of the oldest burials are in the city. And we are here to visit this guy. It took us a long time. This is a huge cemetery. There's like 12,000 burials here. This was no easy task. But this is the last warden of the Stillwater prison right here. And this is not a small stone. It's huge. I don't know. How can I show you how big it is? This is how big the stone is. See my child? Yeah. This is not a little stone. 1901 to 1959 for this wolfer. This one I'm not sure. I will put this on the screen. Here's Harry himself. Died in 1930. We've got a Charles wolfer. Died in 1936. So we were able to pay our last respects to the Wolfer family, including Trudy. We talked to one of the maintenance. Isn't this cool? Okay, here. We got to come back to the cemetery and just do some random stones. But look at this mausoleum. Pretty cool. So we did talk to one of the maintenance guys here at the cemetery, and he helped us figure out the Trudy situation. And I'm just gonna say that people have threatened to, or they are fearful that people will steal the tombstone. So it's in an undisclosed location, but we were able to pay our respects, and yeah, I hope she's at peace. We did find out actually that her son just passed away. He was in his 90s. So that's pretty cool too. They do offer flashlight tours of the old warden's home for those interested in the supernatural. The new Minnesota State Prison was constructed in Bayport, Minnesota, just a few miles from Stillwater. It was built on 160 acres and included 5 cell houses, a dining hall, chapel, hospital, greenhouse, 2 factory buildings, and 2 warehouse buildings. The grounds were surrounded by a tall wall. The prison was designed by architect Clarence H. Johnson, Sr. It was designed to hold 1,200 inmates and was considered the most humane prison in the country at the time. The prisoners were transferred to the new facility between 1912 and 1914, and the old prison was left vacant, aside from the twine factory and Warden's house. Many of the old prison buildings were demolished in 1936. The remaining buildings were still in use. The twine factory continued operation here until the 1970s, and then a dairy company operated here until 1996. The property was then sold back to Stillwater, where it remained vacant. In 2002, a young man committed arson here, and fire consumed the remaining buildings. The land has now been developed into condos, but they do give a nod to the past with the stonework bottom accents. We are now entering where the prison once stood. It is now condos. You can see that they did do a nod to the prison with their turrets and the stonework. It's actually a really, really pretty area. Center area here would have been the courtyard or the park. You can still see where the stone wall was. Once the new prison was up and running, it produced twine, shoes, farm machinery, and other items. In 1920, the state opened a reformatory for women in Shakopee, Minnesota, making the state prison a men's-only facility. The prison, or it is now called the Minnesota Correctional Facility, has been in continuous operation since its construction. It has had many expansions and renovations over the years, and now has the ability to house 1,600 convicts. Today, the complex is a maximum level 4 closed custody prison. It also has a minimum security building on site that houses an additional 100 prisoners. The most famous prisoner here that most would know is Derek Chauvin. He was housed here after the George Floyd incident in 2020. The prison is listed on the National Register of Historic Places due to its Gothic Greek Revival style buildings. They also say a ghost haunts these grounds. He apparently resides in Unit B West on the 3rd floor in an area called The Break, between cells 301 and 732. He stands in the corner by the mop sink. We are now coming upon I don't know if you can call it new, it was built in 1914, prison in Stillwater. And we're just going to do a drive around so you guys can see what it looks like. You can see it's got old parts and new parts. Lots of razor fencing. This is over 100 or about 160 acres that the prison takes up. There's also a minimum security prison on this site that houses about 100 inmates. But a majority of the prison is maximum security, and it is for the worst of the worst in Minnesota. Coming up on the right here is the new Warden's house. Stillwater is a city rich in history and full of interesting people and places. I hope you enjoyed this peek into the past. I will be doing more videos in historic Stillwater, Minnesota and other neighboring areas. So please subscribe so you can be notified when new videos are released. Take care, and I'll see you next time.